Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to another episode of Record Live. It's good to see you again, Jared. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I am looking forward to being on leave tomorrow and until Tuesday. Have a few
Wow.
days off. So that is something I haven't had for a little while, so I'm looking forward to it.
And we have, I'm assuming you're taking leave for a certain reason. We have three important things happening this week. The first is the inspiration of today's topic, which is Remembrance Day. The second is your birthday. And the third is your wedding anniversary.
I know.
What have you got planned? What are you doing?
I like to pack it in. Well, we're going away. Fingers crossed. Last anniversary, we planned to go away and it rained all weekend. We had our toddler with us because the family that was supposed to look after her got COVID. And yeah, it was, let's just say, being trapped with a 1.5-year-old in a hotel room when it's raining outside all weekend is not very fun. This weekend, the weather looks good. We're hoping it will stay that way. We're going to the beach down south of Sydney. We're going to have hopefully some nice vegan food at Bondi at some point. There's a really nice restaurant called Eden in Bondi, which has some amazing vegan food. So I'm looking forward to that. Do some walks on the beach and just some unwind time. And yeah, taking Monday off, but not going to be anywhere. Just going to not work. Just have a long weekend.
Yeah, sounds good.
It should be good.
Awesome.
That's the plan.
Well, let's get into the topic, hey?
Why not?
We are talking about sacrifice today, which is not really a word that we talk about a lot these days. And recently you wrote an article in Signs of the Times in this issue on the cost of sacrifice. And I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover because, like I said, it's a bit taboo these days, that word. Like, we hear it a lot in the Bible. Sometimes we hear about it in movies, but we don't really talk about it. So can you just start off by telling us what the inspiration of this article was?
Yeah, good question. I guess often in Signs we cover things that are happening in the month, and you've already mentioned Remembrance Day, which is coming up on Friday. The idea or the word of sacrifice comes up when we think about some of those things. And I guess I was reflecting on it and going, I feel like sacrifice is a value that we maybe need more of, both in the church and in society. And the reality is, when I'm writing for a Signs audience, we want to make it accessible to people who don't necessarily have the Christian language that we do to express things, and they may not even really understand what sacrifice is, because oftentimes sacrifice is used in popular culture in either animal sacrifices or some weird, maybe even cultic rituals in movies, or it's the hero's sacrifice story arc, which is quite popular. But it's not often the sacrifice. The word itself isn't really reflected on. It's more just we see that demonstrated in the story. We understand that it's sacrifice, but you might call it something else, heroism, or something, generosity, unconditional love, but not so much the word sacrifice. And I think we have an uncomfortable relationship with sacrifice. We're not part of generations that have been called to go on rations for wartime, or to go through the Great Depression and things like that. I was thinking about that earlier today, like cost of living's upping, things are being squeezed, yet we still want to have our little luxuries. We still want to have our, I guess other generations have reacted differently to how we're reacting to some of the pressures in modern life. So I think it's a relevant topic to at least engage with. And I'm not saying that we should be the same as other generations, but we may have to wrestle with it as we go forward, as if things get worse, with wars in Europe and climate change and things like that people are talking about. There might be some pressures that come on us, so we have to engage with this idea of sacrifice a little more frequently, or a little more often.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that. I was copy editing one of our staff members' pieces recently on gambling, and he was saying that during COVID, gambling actually increased like tenfold, which I found really interesting. You'd think that, with I guess us needing to be more careful with our money and prices rising as well, you'd think that that would be the time to kind of like sacrifice those like pleasures or that kind of enjoyment. But it seems to be that we're almost doing the opposite. And so why do you think that we have such like a complex or a difficulty with sacrificing things when they're for our benefit?
I think individualism, entitlement are words that come to mind. And I don't want to say, often you get people on having conversations like this. You might be on a podcast or something, and they're very ready to blame the up and coming generations. Like they don't know what it was like to, I don't think it's a product of, I don't think it's a generational thing. I think it's all generations in society at the moment have been used to fairly good times, fairly content years of plenty. There's been an abundance, perhaps, especially in certain societies, especially around the South Pacific region, for example. We've got a lot. We're very blessed with things, and life has been a little bit easier. And so I think that comes with a certain sense of comfort and a certain sense of, the more you have, in some ways, the easier life gets. And when life gets a bit easy, I guess you want life to stay that way. You're not seeking out. In fact, it's funny, people who have life really easy seek out discomfort to push them out of their comfort zone. So go camping or, it's like, how can we, or hiking or something, they challenge themselves, they push themselves to the limit, perhaps more than people who don't have as much. They're pushed in their everyday lives rather than looking for thrill seeking as a form of adrenaline or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about the word sacrifice before and what it means, and I kept kind of going back to the word discipline, because I was like, is it like, are we just using a different word for sacrifice? Because I think like sacrifice is sort of giving up something of value in the present so that we can improve the future. That's how at least I would think of it, which is kind of discipline. I don't know if I'm wrong if you have a different definition.
Okay, yeah.
Discipline, which when I think about it in terms of discipline, like I do see people acting in discipline. Not everyone. Some people are really poor, but some people, I think, in our day and age are quite aware of the fact that they need to discipline themselves in order to grow or in order to get something or achieve something. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's one part of sacrifice that we often associate with sacrifice. I think that's why we are uncomfortable with sacrifice, because that's how we see it, as discipline, as delayed gratification, which we don't always want to delay. In that sense of, you said, giving up something now for something better down the track. I think sacrifice in its truest sense, or I think the stuff that gets us, the stuff that's always interested me about sacrifice, I guess I should say, to not put words in anyone else's mouth, is if we look at the Bible, when you're giving up a lamb, for example, to go back to the archetype, the intention of sacrifice, it was an innocent life given on behalf of someone else. The lamb had not done anything wrong. It was a perfect lamb. It wasn't to get rid of the blemished lambs, the lame ones, the blind ones, to thin out the flock or to encourage, good husbandry. It was the best. It was bringing the best. And it wasn't something that made life better down the track. It actually made life harder, because you were giving up your best, your first fruits and stuff. And I think the best form of sacrifice doesn't have the idea that if I do this now, I'll get something better later. And I think we can fall into that trap in the Christian church. We can say, well, I'm willing to sacrifice myself, my life, I'll do something, but I've got the reward of eternal life or of heaven, or, Jesus, when he sacrificed for us, when part of the beauty of that sacrifice to me is that he knew what was coming. I'm not 100% sure, and I'd have to do further reading around this in terms of what other more wise people than I have written about it, theologians and scholars and stuff, but I'm not entirely sure whether he was 100% assured of the outcome in terms of what would happen once he died. I think, Paul reflects on him not holding on to his power as something to be grasped, something to be held onto, but let that go to act as a servant. Part of his sacrifice was not just his death. We often think about it as the death, but his life as a poor, itinerant preacher, someone who was born into fear and oppression, had to run before he was, that old. They had to flee to Egypt to escape Herod. There was, his life was a sacrifice in some senses from the heavenly, the experience that he had before that, eternity and all that. He stepped down from that. And so, I'm just reflecting on the idea. Well, it can incorporate discipline, but I think it's more than that. The stories that have always, stuck with me, and I think why the Avengers saga resonated so much was, and it's been out for a few years, so this is not a spoiler. If you haven't seen it, that's your problem. But Iron Man makes the ultimate sacrifice. He was one of the original characters right through, consistent through, and then he's the one that, and in some senses, Black Widow, another character, makes the sacrifice. There is no giving up something now for coming back better. They die. That's the end. Some characters go and come back. Some characters are in and out of the stories, but for them, there is no better or there is no happy ending. But I guess why do they do it? Well, the knowledge of perhaps making life better for someone else.
Yeah.
That was the sacrifice. And so, stories like Desmond Doss, we resonate with Hacksaw Ridge, the movie, or with, these kinds of stories. Lord of the Rings, the Frodo was not necessarily expecting to come back once he'd done his quest. It's not that you're expecting to do something to improve something for yourself in the future. It's really about others. And I think true sacrifice is others centered.
Good point. Actually, went and saw the Avengers movie and I fell asleep in how they have the trailers at the beginning? I fell asleep in the trailers and I woke up in the credits. So you just informed me of everything I needed to know.
Oh, no.
It's great. I'm never going to see it again, so it's fine.
That is a long nap, Sanita. That's impressive. You must have been really tired. Or you found it boring.
No, just any movie. It just tends to be.
Wow.
I don't know. It's asleep, but anyway, it was a good 20 minute nap.
That must be your superpower.
Yeah, maybe. But I like what you're saying, though. I like that the difference then between discipline is that with discipline, there's more of a guarantee that there's a benefit, I suppose, at the end. Whereas with sacrifice, you're not really guaranteed that. If anything, like if we look at the examples from the Bible and from like war and all of that, and from the movies you're mentioning, it's more about maybe the others benefiting, but you don't come out with a benefit.
I've always liked Remembrance Day and stuff because, we're remembering, and it doesn't have some of the mythological proportions or the glorification of war that sort of Anzac Day has come to incorporate. It's just sort of, there's a minute's silence, it's solemn, we do the wreath or the poppies, lay the poppies, wear the poppy. And it's more about remembering. And for me, really powerful moment when I was in the War Memorial, the Shrine of Remembrance down in Melbourne, in the city of Melbourne, in the CBD there. There's a big beautiful old building that they erected after World War One for this purpose of remembering this conflict where so many people had lost their lives. For them, it was unprecedented. This First World War was the first time something on this scale they felt had happened. And the verse in the center of the center part of that shrine, whatever you call it, is greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friend. And obviously those are Jesus' words from John, but it is a really powerful verse. And it's to me, it's interesting that they had at that point tied those things together. The idea of, a lot of the people that went to war at that time, they may have had a choice, or maybe they didn't have a choice, but they had no idea what they were getting themselves into, and many of them didn't come back. And I guess, again, it was like they felt a sense of, one thing that World War One did was destroyed the idea of glorious war. In societies before this, there was sort of this idea of, for king and country, you go, you do your duty. It was kind of put up on a pedestal, and the grime and the trenches, the grit and the trench foot and the mustard gas of World War One just completely destroyed any illusions of this grand, blow the trumpets, get all dressed in your shiny armor, have a sword fight, and perhaps take noble hostages, which you can swap later on, and nobody too many, only the peasants die. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Like this war was a completely different level. And I guess that was all they had to look back on after that conflict, was like, well, we have to honor these people because they sacrificed to keep us free. They sacrificed to stop evil in its tracks, sort of thing.
I suppose another reason why it's difficult for us to think of sacrifice is because in the past it's all been these huge grand things like war, and like I think sacrifice is a bit more than like us just enlisting to go fight in war tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? It obviously looks different as well, but when you think about like sacrifice in your everyday life, what kind of comes to mind? Like what sort of things are you sacrificing?
Yeah. It's a good question, especially over COVID. I think it may have even become harder to sacrifice in a sense. My wife and I have emphasized saving, trying to save up for a house and for, having babies, and things are happening. So you want to save, you want to perhaps minimize going out. And so there hasn't been a draw on our finances or on our time and our talents. I feel like offerings and mission projects and even mission trips and those sort of things, that's an opportunity in some senses to sacrifice. There's needs all around us, soup kitchens and places we could use our time and our talents. And COVID has sort of just put a stop to that, I think, for a lot of people. Maybe I'm speaking just for myself, but I feel like we're perhaps a little disconnected from opportunities to practice sacrifice. And it might be not on the grand scale of giving your whole life to something. Although I think there still are opportunities to do that, that we should perhaps think through, think about doing. But I was in the Pacific recently. I was in Fiji and talking with some people there that knew my grandparents who were there as missionaries, and we're reflecting on, I guess, the sense that people are less ready to pack up their lives and pack up their family and go and serve somewhere else. That in itself is a really big form of sacrifice. To sacrifice leisure, to sacrifice perhaps a career. My grandfather, if he'd stayed in the work that he started doing when he first became an Adventist, he would have been a very successful dairy farmer or dairy tester. He used to go test all the cows in the district for certain things, and he was very good at farming. So he left that. He went and taught and pastored and went overseas. And so, and now I'm not saying there's not a lot of fulfillment in that, but it's different to what we're faced with, I guess, the choices we have today. So, we hear the story of the widow's mite, and it's about the attitude of the giver. So I don't suggest people give if they're not feeling inclined to, but that widow gave very little, but it was a lot for her. It was a sacrifice. It was a choice that she prioritized. And so for us, I think, we're finding reasons, or we're disconnected a little bit from different things that we used to be involved in or interested in. And so we're not necessarily giving. We might still be doing tithe because that's a little easier. It's like a regular chunk and it just goes and you don't think about it. But offerings, or our time and our talents and our priorities, our values, are we investing those in kingdom causes, or are we investing those in our own luxury?
Yeah. You wrote in your article, one of the things you said was that sacrifice always costs something, but sometimes the cost is worth it. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because we've kind of talked about how it's like a selfless thing to do and we're not expect anything back. So what is that cost we're receiving?
Yeah, the cost is real, and you don't always receive the cost. I guess in the conversation today, we've reflected on that already. But there is a benefit, but it's not always for you. So, for example, if you're, and I was thinking about our witness or our calling as Christians. If we're reaching out and sacrificing something, if someone else is impacted for the kingdom, if someone else finds life and light in Jesus because of our sacrifice, then it's worth it. Then it's worth it. So, you hear stories that inspire me. Maybe I'm just a sucker for punishment, but I love hearing the stories about some places in the world where there is persecution, and it is really hard to be a Christian. And I love the fact that it's actually, they pray for us, and they pray not for persecution to be taken away, but so that they'll be faithful through that period, because they've realized, they've understood that the sacrifice that they're called to make in times of persecution is what has a lasting value in the kingdom. It has some kind of payoff, maybe not for them, but for the spread of the gospel, for the people that are witnessing their sacrifice, for the kingdom in some unknown sense that they'll never know about, but that down the track will be made known to them. When we all get to heaven, we sing that song, when we all get to heaven. And I think when we get to heaven, it'll be those stories that are the things that are going to really hit us and impact us. When we never knew the sacrifice that we made at that point actually had some benefit, some not cost, but it was worth it, as I said in the article.
It reminds me a little bit of the story of Peter Pan.
Okay.
Just what you're saying, because I guess Peter Pan is this boy who doesn't ever want to grow up, and the main adult he sees in his life is Captain Cook, which is who wants to become like Captain Cook? And so Peter Pan says, well, I'm not going to sacrifice my childhood for that. And then he ends up King of the Lost Boys in Neverland, and he never ends up growing up, which some might say that's great, but he actually sacrifices a lot of things with that. He sacrifices the possibility of having a relationship with a woman because, they want to grow up and have kids and they want to take life a bit more seriously. And, he never gets a lot of these things that are actually a beautiful part of life because he's not willing to sacrifice certain pleasures or certain enjoyments.
A childish mindset.
yeah, I guess we can look at sacrifice in that way as well. It's like we can sacrifice things in
I
terms
think
of
I
like
think
our growth.
yeah, I think the Bible's clear in terms of and we don't always use the term sacrifice, but the idea of um, self improvement, or God, Jesus, guiding our characters to be to give up the flesh, for example.
Mm.
I think when the authors talk about the battle between flesh and the spirit, that's really about surrender, and we've talked about that a few issues ago, a few episodes ago. Surrender of your wants and your desires and your needs and your pleasures, to use that word. If you're surrendering those things, often the Bible describes it as not entertaining the flesh, not giving power to the flesh, but going by the Spirit. Why? Because it's hard. It's our human systems are set up to receive and to enjoy having pleasure. There are bad reactions in our brain when we get stressed or when bad situations happen. And so we try and avoid bad things happening at all costs. And so it's very hard for us to then tell ourselves, and this goes back to the discipline thing or the self-denial thing, that is a form of sacrifice. And it's a positive thing, but not something we can do on our own, because our human system, as I said, is set up to have that. And so that's when we need the Spirit to actually help us to sacrifice, to help us to deny ourselves, to crucify our flesh, and not entertain the flesh, but to be led by the Spirit, I guess, is the sort of New Testament language that the authors of the New Testament couch around that.
New Testament Peter Pan language, we'll call it.
Yeah.
In order to mature, sometimes we need to make sacrifices, I suppose. Do you have any personal stories about like a time where you have sacrificed something and have either, maybe just that?
When I was a kid, one that really sticks with me, there's some memories as a child or as a, from a long time. This is from a long time ago. We got a prize at Sabbath school, tennis balls. Nice. 3-pack of tennis balls. And my friends were irresponsible. I was the saver, the conservative one. I was keeping my tennis balls. We were playing with them, and yet I was making sure, that I did so in a safe way. And my friend lost a couple of his tennis balls. One went over the fence of the neighbors near the church and things. So I had extra, and he had none. And I was like, the right thing to do is to give him one of mine. So, I know. So I did. And you know what? There was no payoff. He didn't really thank me as such that I remember. I don't remember being thanked. I felt like I did the right thing, but I also felt kind of sad because I only had one tennis ball now instead of 3 or something. Because I shared with my friends. I went home and I never got a tennis. My friends didn't say, "Oh, next week, show up and say, hey, here's a tennis ball to replace the one, we needed," or whatever. It was just, it was doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. And I feel like it was formative for me because it's something that I would like to think that I would still be doing, still be willing to do, perhaps on a grander scale. It's not tennis balls anymore, but is it a bootload of groceries to a friend who is struggling with something, or someone in the church who Is it letting someone stay? My wife and I have had people crashing at our house for one reason or another for a long time or short time because they've not had somewhere else to go, or they've been between things, and it's been hard. And for that sort of thing, it's like I feel like we're actually called to do that as Christians. it helps us to be better people, and it is an opportunity to demonstrate the love that we are called to have. Jesus said, people will know that you're my disciples by how you love each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's where sacrificial love, in that Signs article that we're talking a little bit about, that was my reflection, was to let people know that Christians, we should be a bunch of people who can help others when they're struggling.
Mm.
And so we're called to do that. The church is called to do that. We reflected, yes, there's a history of sacrifice in the Christian church, and we haven't lost that, or we shouldn't lose that. So we still got that in our DNA, and we're still there. We're still available to be there when people need that. And so I'm encouraging people who, in that article, who don't belong to the church, to reach out to a Christian group. Maybe there's a community that can welcome them and help them when they need it. But as Christians, as Adventist Record, as we talk in this context, we must challenge ourselves to be those people.
It's a very heroic story of you giving away your tennis balls, but I think it's a good it's a good example, I suppose, of another way in which we can live sacrificially, in terms of like giving away things, or giving our time, or giving our possessions, because I think that's still something that we're not really used to doing, even if we are Christians. I'm certainly not in the habit of doing that very often, but it's a good point.
It's a challenge. It's not easy, and that's why it's a sacrifice.
Yeah, I guess another example, something that you and I were speaking about earlier, something that I've done in terms of sacrifice that maybe looks a little bit different, is I had a period where I lived in my van, and I mostly did it because I was like trying to save money, and I also thought I could either work an extra 2 days for rent, or I could live cheaper, like live in a van and not pay rent, and then I have that time to like do like ministry work, or I have that time to like spend with others, kind of thing. And that was, I guess, a sacrifice of like pleasures or comfort, I suppose. But yeah, I guess it had a deeper meaning to it. Like it wasn't just I want to live in a van, doing it for another reason. But
I guess my follow-up question, because that's really interesting to me, I'm someone that likes to have a fallback plan. And so I would feel really, I think, insecure having just a van. Do you know what I mean? For myself. But did you find that it gave you more time for ministry? Did you do more sacrificial, others-centered life? Or was it just like you had less money, so you didn't have to work as much, so you could, I don't know, go surfing more, or relax a bit more? What did it end up becoming? I'm just curious about that for you.
I definitely had more time to surf, but like I that wasn't the purpose. And at the time I was doing a little bit of like volunteer Bible work sort of stuff, and when you've got like a full-time job, that's really hard to fit in. And I guess because I had so many people in my life at the time who I was wanting to connect with, and if I had a full-time job, I wouldn't have had the time to do that. Like I wouldn't have been able to give them that like attention or that time. So I don't know, it actually was an awesome period, because I did just that. Like I had so much time with other people, which I think is, in a way it's a sacrifice. Like I think it's a real blessing, but in a way you're still sacrificing your time. And I could have been doing anything, but so that's what I did.
I think you are, and I think it shows, your example, I guess, goes to show that sacrifice doesn't always have to be unpleasant. I think we'd still classify it as a sacrifice, as a life choice that you're making, and there's benefits to it. We can acknowledge that. And I don't know, is that really a sacrifice? If you look into something and you're like, well, there's some benefits, I think you have to see that sometimes it's still a sacrifice, but it's I'm fascinated to hear about that period of your life, because it is choosing a different lifestyle or sacrificing something. But as you've demonstrated with your story, like, you got a lot out of it, and other people did too. There was others around the reasons why you did it, and so you weren't just thinking about yourself, you were thinking about others in
Mm.
that space. And I think, going back to the core of what sacrifice is, I think it's others centered. I think it's about someone else, not about me.
Mm. And yeah, I guess like you said, that doesn't mean it has to be horrible. I think when you know your why, it's not necessarily as bad. Or maybe the pain of the experience is more bearable. Like, for example, living in a van was often quite uncomfortable. Like, because you don't have a bathroom and you don't have like the comfort of like a lounge to spread out on, or you can't stand up. There's heaps of things that aren't ideal, but when you know why you're doing it, it can be a lot easier and a lot more rewarding.
Definitely.
Do you have any questions about sacrifice?
I guess as we move into this weekend, Friday, you might see some things Friday morning about Remembrance Day, the services that are happening, and that sort of thing. And I guess for me, Remembrance Day for me is always like, yep, I get the stuff, the history, the idea of it. I always take the opportunity to thank God, I suppose, in that time. A minute's silence or whatever is often like a prayer, or the opportunity to take a prayer. So yeah, I'd say as we're moving into the weekend, and as things around the world are celebrating or remembering, commemorating these things, it's good to remember where God has brought us, and the sacrifices that He's made for us, and just ask ourselves practically, is there anything we could do? Could we go without something for some pleasure for a little while to make someone else's lives better, to donate, or to give something, to do something, to be others centered for a moment of our time, talents, money. It doesn't have to be all about money. It can be any area that you can give some time to someone else in.
And I guess that's like a good way to, like, we always like to end our record lives on a practical note, which you've kind of landed the plane in that direction.
Yeah.
Like, ending on a practical note, you've kind of already answered this. Like, how can we be practical about sacrifice? It's thinking about like the things we can sacrifice, or the time we can sacrifice. Yeah. Would you have anything else to say to that? How can people start to think about it more?
Your kids, your community, are there needs around you that are going unmet? I guess the first level is just to think about, can I just donate to a cause or something like that? And that's good, that's nice, but it doesn't hurt too much, and also you don't see firsthand the benefits as much, but is there actually something in the spaces and the places around you that you can actually address this week, and start to find out more about, how can I pour into this space to make it better? I guess the practical first step would also be to pray about it. If there is a need that you see, to ask the Holy Spirit, how can I be an answer to this problem? Not just pray for the problem. We often do that. We often, sometimes we even teach our kids, to pray for the poor and the hungry and the sick, but are we actually praying to be a solution for those people to be? And that's where the Holy Spirit might say, well, maybe
Africa.
you need to sacrifice this to do this. Well, maybe not everyone needs to move to Africa.
Yeah, for sure.
Plenty of problems right around us, but it might be moved to Africa if that's the problem that you see and you think you have special skills to address. Maybe the Holy Spirit will will lead you in that space. But I think we need to pray, and I think we need to look closely around us to identify some of those needs that we can pour into.
Awesome. Well, I feel like that's going to be a challenge for me this week. I live in a house now, not a van, so I don't often think about sacrifice, probably as much as I should. So thank you for your nuggets of wisdom and your advice.
No worries. Thank you. It's been interesting.
Yeah, it's been great. We'll end it there, but enjoy your holiday, enjoy your birthday, enjoy your anniversary. And
Thank you.
See on Record Live next week.
We've got a special guest next week, Zanita.
Yeah, we do. We have Robbie Fatt, who has recently made a film. So we're going to be talking to him about filmmaking and, yeah, just about his new movie that is released. So that'll be awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Anita. And thanks, everyone else. See you next week. Bye.